I guess we'll start out by calling the roll.
Yes, Commissioner Green
Present.
and Commissioner Shaw.
Present.
And Commissioner Green, would you like me to call the items? I'm happy to do that.
Whatever works for you, Mark.
Okay,
Whatever works.
I'll do it. So approval, item 2 is approval of the minutes for the meeting of July 13th, 2021. There's no one on the public comment line.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve?
I would move to approve.
And I will second.
That takes care of the voting for that. Thank you. Item 3 is general public comment, and I'm going to note again for the record that there's no one on the line, so there can be no public comment. Item 4 is the executive team report.
So, good afternoon, Commissioners. Good afternoon, Mark. Can you still hear us okay?
Beautifully.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Zoe. Zoe, can you advance to slide number 4, please? Okay. I take it?
You asked if they can see the share.
Yeah.
Here we go.
All right.
Looks great. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, slide 4, please, Zoe. All right. Well, once again, good afternoon, Commissioners, and our sincere apologies, number 4, Zoe, our sincere apologies for the technical difficulties as we continue to try to work our way through them. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So, of course, we've been in a surge over the last few weeks. The recent surge really has provided a stark reminder that the pandemic is far from over. Although we've experienced a sharp increase in cases during the past month, we're still managing to keep our residents safe. Thankfully, we haven't had any positive resident cases since the month of January. Next slide. Here's a monthly case detail for thus far during 2021. This is as of August the 4th. As you can see, we've had 23 staff cases during the month of July, whereas previously we had been averaging just 1 or 2 cases a month. The recent cases were distributed throughout multiple departments here at the hospital, and over 2/3 of the cases were actually among vaccinated individuals. Next slide. Although the reemergence of the virus has been disappointing, Laguna Honda has responded appropriately. In addition to increasing staff testing to a twice-a-week cadence, we're also significantly limiting movement on all quarantine units. But we also understand the importance of maintaining good quality of life for our residents. So we're maintaining visitation and other activities on neighborhoods that are not on quarantine. Our ultimate goal, of course, is to limit our residents' exposure to the virus. Thus far, we've been successful. Despite the increase in staff cases, we're managing to avoid an outbreak among our residents. One of the keys to our success has been our high vaccination rate. Currently, we have 91% of our residents who are fully vaccinated, and only 56 have declined the vaccine. Next slide. The results are very similar on the staff side, with 90% of staff being fully vaccinated. We still have 141 individuals who have declined the vaccine, so that obviously remains a concern for us. Fortunately, with the recent health order that is mandating vaccination for employees working in high-risk settings, We believe this will ultimately move our vaccination rate closer to 100%. For care experience, we recently had the pleasure of hosting Supervisor Myrna Melgar and 3 of her legislative aides here at Laguna Honda. This was really a great opportunity for the supervisor to provide the supervisor an overview of our operations, as well as to discuss with her our strategic plan. And it was also a great opportunity for the supervisor to meet and interact with a variety of our staff members from different departments. We were able to learn about some of her priorities, and we were pleasantly surprised to see that they aligned very closely with our mission and our priorities here at Laguna Honda. These are just a few of the photos that we took during the tour while she was here. She had a very keen interest in a number of areas, but one of the areas that she had a lot of interest in was the proposed project for senior housing. And we had the opportunity to take her on the tour and actually walk the area where the proposed housing site will be located. So we continue with our reopening plan, the key really for us with reopening is that we're keeping the activities that we're bringing on to a manageable level. For example, we're tightly scheduling certain services such as family visits and residents who are out on pass. This really is an effort for us to provide support to the staff, but also obviously to minimize exposure to our residents. Later this week, we will implement visitor testing. We haven't done visitor testing to date, so we realize the vulnerability that visitors create for our residents. So we will be implementing a vaccine status tracking for all visitors later this week. Here's just a snapshot of admissions, discharges, and expirations. Nothing extraordinary here. During the month of July, we had 18 admissions, 5 total discharges, and 7 expirations. And this is a summary of our financials. The main takeaway for our financial summary is that for fiscal year 21 and 22, our budget has been approved by the Board of Supervisors. And overall, in our budget, we're seeing just a modest increase in our general fund of around right at $1 million. For our revenue budget, our budget reflects a $12.7 million increase in revenue compared to the prior year. The majority of the increase, $9.4 million, is due to a projected increase in our Medi-Cal reimbursement rate. And we're also anticipating an additional $4.6 million in FEMA reimbursement related to COVID expenses. On the expenditure side, we have an increase as well. The increase there is $13.6 million over the prior year allocation. And of that 13.6 amount, 12.8 million of it was associated with the cost of living adjustment. Several of our labor contracts specify that cost of living adjustment be made, and so that is what that is relating to. We were also allocated $8.8 million in capital improvements, and we will be seeing an $8.3 million reduction in our projected COVID-related expenses. And finally, our team of the month for July is our outpatient services team. This is really a high-performing, highly reliable group that's led by one of our physicians, Dr. Christina Lee. As you know, this team is responsible for the provision of a variety of clinical services to our residents. And of the clinics that we operate, which is quite a number, 20 or so different clinics. Our clinics operate Monday through Friday of every week, and the capacity has been pretty high. We did during the pandemic, of course, limit the number of clinics, but several of them, continue to operate, have continued to operate throughout the pandemic. So in addition to the overall clinic responsibilities of this team, the outpatient services group led our staff influenza vaccination effort, as well as our COVID-19 vaccination campaign. And impressively, while this staff was conducting the initial rollout of the vaccine for COVID, not a single dose of vaccine was wasted. And that really was just a tribute to how well this team has performed for us. And so with that, I'll stop here and we will attempt to answer any of your questions.
All right. Thank you so much. Is there any public comment on this item?
There's still no replying, Commissioner, so there's no public comment.
Great. Commissioner Chow, I know you had written some questions and
Yes, and I want to thank staff for, I thought, some good explanations on the operations and on COVID. So I think we stuck with COVID. I appreciate the comments concerning the visitors and also the residents out on paths. So if I were to just concentrate on both sides, first, residents going out on paths have a potential of mixing with the unvaccinated even more than, obviously, more than within the campus, where we have 10% on unvaccinated staff, but in the open world, there are thousands of people, up to about 20%, right, within our own community. So is there some program that would then encourage that these people do, appropriately follow, and that's very difficult to do, especially in this population. So, what are the measures we're taking when they come home? And I guess secondly would be on the part of the visitors that come into our building. So there's kind of two parts to this. You've mentioned that there would be testing or I guess a vaccination, check. So if there is a vaccination check and somebody says, I already have been vaccinated, are we keeping that, or will they have to show that each time? Because obviously this is a chronic care facility and people will be coming often as they schedule their visits. So sorry, but there are two parts. One is, are patients going out, and what precautions are we taking, especially when they come back? And when visitors come in, a little more description on what this vaccination check would be.
So I will defer to Dr. Hathaway for the first question, but while she thinks about that, I will attempt to answer the second part of the question. So we will be developing a system of checking and recording visitor status, vaccine status, so that they will not have to, each time they come, prove that they've had the vaccine. So it's not in place as of yet, but later this week we anticipate being ready to have that system implemented.
Very, very good. Thank you. and we'll look towards the other question. I did want to thank you for the details that we're getting. Of course, Laguna is a potential area which for these 2 years you've all been doing very well in the prevention of serious diseases, except for, of course, that one month that everybody was getting sick. So that's really very commendable, and especially us being kept up to date because this is a very vulnerable area. So I guess a third question would be, with all the discussion from Dr. Fauci and all the other types of comments being made about the vulnerable populations, and sometimes they're mentioning age and sometimes not, what is Laguna thinking also about the idea of booster shots? However you want to define those.
So once again, I'll start, and team members, you can feel free to jump in. And I'm just giving you mostly my opinion here. So we, like many of our protocols and processes, have taken the lead from CDC and from other established expert sources. And so at this point, we don't have plans to implement a booster. However, if the guidance should lean in that direction, we would implement accordingly.
Okay, that's a fair answer. Thank you. I just thought perhaps we had even greater insight, since we're a lead organization in taking care of the elderly. But I appreciate what you're saying. That certainly makes sense.
So Commissioner Chow, we've been actually tracking this, and San Francisco General is offering boosters, but it's really only for folks who are requesting them. As I understand it, the CDC, Dr. Fauci, they're saying there's really not much efficacy in the booster right now, and they're not supporting that. What San Francisco General is doing is something a little different, and it's only been because people have requested them, and so they're offering them. So as Michael said, I think as we hear more about it, we will definitely follow that lead. But right now, as I understand it from the system, and I think Claire is here.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to that. Thank you so much. I think you're right that it's actually not something that's been generated out of Laguna or even ZSFG, but there is actually a DPH/COVID task force guidance that's been issued around this, and basically we're not calling it a booster, but a supplemental dose. So because we know the efficacy of the vaccine is a little bit lower in the J&J vaccine, and because there is some data that it boosts, that you get a boost in the immune response if you then boost with an mRNA vaccine, but there's not clinical data to show that it actually is more highly protective in the long run. So everybody, kind of our leading ID folks, looked at it together and decided there wasn't enough evidence to recommend to everyone that they get a supplemental dose. And in fact, as we just alluded to, there's several healthcare related bodies that have essentially said, like, don't do this at this time. So however, we had people who were coming to some of our vaccine sites who have said, look, I'm immune suppressed, and my oncologist has seen this data and recommended a supplemental vaccine. And so the guideline creating group decided to say, rather than that there is not enough, while there's not enough evidence to suggest to recommend to everyone that they get a supplemental dose after J&J, that we wouldn't turn people away if they had a medical recommendation to get a supplemental dose. I think probably it would make sense for us to share the memo that outlines that guidance with you all. I will also say that we shared that with our Med Exec Committee to make sure that there are no concerns at ZSFG, because our ZSFG site was going to be asked to honor that. And it did create some I would say, a little bit of consternation among some of our partner organizations in the city, who then didn't quite know how to deal with the volume of people that might be coming in wondering if they had the same policy. So it was really a guideline rather than a policy. And I think what was original, and again, it was the task force committee around vaccinations that came up with it. I think, but we've been kind of dealing with the aftermath for a week or so now. And I think what part of the aftermath is we've had more volumes of people coming into our vaccine sites than we had been used to get this supplemental dose. So, I think it's a reasonable stance to take, but it has had some implications for other health systems. And so far, DPH and the task force are kind of sticking by the guideline. But we do know that we are trying to kind of answer some of the concerns that have come up operationally from other health systems. And as you know, I think there's also this issue of, I think it was the WHO recommended that essentially like Western countries with good or any countries with good vaccine rates not even think about supplemental doses until the rest of the countries of the world have had enough vaccine. It's a little hard when you're looking at an expiring vaccine in your site and you've got somebody who's telling you that their physician has recommended a supplemental dose. So that's kind of the current state of where we are with that situation. And I'm happy to keep you all updated and also can send Mark the memo so that you all know are up to date on what's so that the whole health commission can see the current guideline.
And Dr. Horn, I believe that the supplemental, and I like that terminology that you're all using, is related only to the Johnson & Johnson, right?
Correct.
And
Right.
the other vaccines have not. So I think at Laguna, you had not been using the Johnson & Johnson, right? Those were all 2 shots?
That's correct. We've only used Pfizer and Moderna.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Great.
Okay. I've kind of lost track exactly what question 1 was about, but I know
Sorry.
Oh, how
I think
how you were
that question
handling the
Adam
patient?
passed, Dr. Chow?
Yeah, out of, the ones going on out of pass, how are we handling them? Because they're going to be potentially mixing with unvaccinated people more than even here.
Right. So for folks that go on Adam Pass that are vaccinated, they can return without any isolation precautions. So of course, we're always encouraging social distancing and masking while they're out on their pass. For folks that return from Adam Pass and are unvaccinated, they will need to undergo a 14-day isolation. And that includes testing for COVID and testing negative prior to them coming out of isolation. Our Adam Passes right now are controlled. We're only allowing, I think, still 3 per unit per day. And so that allows us control of the flow to some degree.
Thank you. I appreciate the I think the caution that you're all exhibiting as we try to accommodate the desires of our residents.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. I guess, in follow-up on the COVID issue, I guess I have a few questions, which is, there are so many reports now of vaccinated individuals with COVID. I actually have one in my office as of today. And so the concern comes that of course tests don't necessarily become positive. People can shed before the test is positive. And with this vulnerable population we have, I guess the 2 questions would be, how will we handle data if indeed it turns out that whether people with vaccinations shed the virus more rapidly, as the Singapore data suggest, or whether there's a bigger issue? How do we plan on gathering the data that then helps guide your policies? And that includes, of course, with visitors. And then also, if indeed, the trend line continues, at least for the short haul with Delta, what will that do to the COVID related expenses? Have you got any thoughts about that? But the guidance is, obviously is difficult because we're trying to look for data we don't have. And in this population, I would think we have to be more proactive because the ramifications of an outbreak in our vulnerable populations are so much greater, never mind the hospitalizations and so forth. So curious to know, how you're analyzing that.
So again, I'm going to do the second part. Wilmy, you do the first. With regard to your minor question about COVID-related expenses, so when our budget was developed, of course, we were not in a surge. And so the guidance sort of flowed from there, and the result was there was a reduction in our allocation for COVID-related expenses. But like with every budget cycle, there's a projection and then there's an actual reality of the landscape. And there are mechanisms for us to, as the reality sets in, there are mechanisms for us to receive additional allocations. And I'm certain that that will happen should we need, and should we need an additional allocation, I'm certain that we will be able to get it.
Great, good. Great. Any thoughts about just the shedding of virus among the vaccinated?
Clinicians, any thoughts?
So we're all very unclear exactly how this virus works. And what we have is experience from when this virus first showed up about 1.5 years ago. And when the virus first showed up, we collaborated with all of the subject matter experts, CDC, SFDPH, and our folks here. And we were able to keep it out as much as we can. We only had 6 deaths at the peak of the pandemic. And now we have an over 90% vaccination rate for both staff and for residents. So we have that on our side, in our favor. Although we've been having positive staff cases, majority of which are vaccinated, we haven't had a true positive with our patients. And so it shows to me that the mitigation plan that we have set in place from the very beginning has worked. And I think that we may not know exactly what's going on with COVID, but that we have done, the facility has done such a tremendous job on keeping it out and mitigating it, and that if we just go to this path and we continue, that we will still continue to succeed. Now, in terms of if we change our protocol, if we change any sort of mitigation plan, I think it just depends on how COVID runs, and it depends on the CDC guidelines and SFDPH's guidelines for us.
Great.
Unless you guys want to add anything else.
I think the only thing is that, yeah, we've had a mix of vaccinated and unvaccinated staff positive. We've actually tried to collect some data of cycle thresholds, which tell us infectivity. And we've had a couple of genomic testing. And so far we had not found Delta yet that I know of. We had found Alpha, the UK variant. And the one thing that was striking is at least one of the staff with a fairly low cycle threshold, which means fairly high viral load, felt quite well and cleared within the 14 days of clearance, and there were no positive staff. And this is a staff who floats around a bit. So that's a good sign, we think, that the vaccination is doing well by us. And I will say that, as you probably know, Claire, because we sent you emails, and Wilmy sent you some, that we were changing our staff testing cadence to once a week, once every 2 weeks, or nobody who's vaccinated needs to get tested. But once we saw the uptick, which included vaccinated staff, we pivoted and we've increased our testing again to catch some of those people who might be fairly infectious if they had Delta and these kind of low cycle thresholds. So I think that, I think we did kind of bend and use the data we had available from the staff that we've tested to let us know that we may need to turn around, pivot, and increase the testing again, at least temporarily, to help us through this time.
I mean, I
And
will
also,
also,
I mean,
oh, sorry.
sorry. One thing I just wanted to add is, and John gave us a hand, is there's one thing that we haven't changed since the beginning, and that's the social distancing and masking and hand washing. And so that's always been in place, and we know that is proven to be effective. Sorry.
I was just gonna, that was funny. I was just gonna jump in to say, it's actually interesting because Laguna Hondas are one spot that was continued with being sort of like such a high risk spot as a congregate living facility. Is our one part of the network that has continued like just ongoing screening testing for the vaccinated staff. And so honestly, it was seeing your weekly numbers that kind of really convinced me that yes, people with vaccinated people really are getting this. I mean, you read the national news and you see the reports in the Chronicle, but I think it's been a really interesting kind of small local just source of data and experience to watch you all go through it, and then also to see you handle it well. I do know that I think also the testing branch and DPHHR just came out with some guidelines for our staff when vaccinated staff have asymptomatic disease, what exactly they're supposed to do, which was, I don't remember all the details, but it was really helpful to me to see that we have really clear guidance on how long they should stay home, how long they have to mask, when they should go back. That's been helpful because this is starting to arise a lot more. And I'll just channel Lisa Winston to say, even with Delta, which is more transmissible, the mild infections and it seems to be that asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic cases are much less transmissible just because there's just less stuff to sneeze out and there's often less of a viral load, but it can look like a whole lot of different things. So I think it's good that we're in this place. I'll also say that San Francisco General, like a lot of other hospitals in the nation, are tracking their data about who is getting hospitalized, as is the city. And as you all know, I think we're seeing what other places are seeing, which is that the vast amount of people who get like the cases are up, the vast amount of people who are getting hospitalized, though, are the unvaccinated. So I do feel really good about like the protection level of the vaccine, even though Delta is just like running those cases kind of through the roof in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I mean, it's great work you've done, and a real, I think, testament to the fact that you're really jumping on things and trying to analyze as much data as we can get. I guess one other question is, are we doing anything to assess? I realize that the immunity has more to do with just antibody, but are we doing anything to assess, given that the Laguna staff was among the very first to get vaccinated, I think in San Francisco? Is there any concern that some of your staff members might have waning immunity, or when Claire was talking about boosters, wondering if we have any knowledge of that, because it'd be truly tragic if we found that a lot of our healthcare workers, especially because the city workers were the first to be vaccinated. I think the healthcare workers of all, that they're going to tell us, they're on the lead of telling us when immunity might wane or when vulnerability might increase. Any thoughts about that, or any tracking of that?
That's a great question, and to my knowledge, that's not something we're tracking. Don't have anything where we're like checking antibody levels or anything among our staff. I suspect our ID folks are thinking about that. So if I run across any information or any like ideas of looking into that, I will, or if like we are a research institution too. So if somebody's got something going on, we'll try and loop back with you all and tell you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and great work. Any other comments or thoughts, Dr. Chow?
No, thank you. They've really appreciate the discussion here that gives us, I think, confidence that we're continuing to be alert, even though we're, quote, opening up a little more.
Yes, and your outpatient services people really deserve high praise for the work, and it's just amazing what they've been able to do given the unexpected responsibilities that have come their way. So please extend their thanks from us as well. All right, so next on the agenda.
Sure. Item 5 is the Regulatory Affairs Report.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Geraldine Mariano, Director of Regulatory Affairs, and I will be sharing the regulatory affairs for Laguna Honda Hospital. The report reflects activity for the month of July. Laguna Honda reported 18 facility reported incidents to CDPH for the month of July and received 2 anonymous complaints. We had 2 unannounced site visits for CDPH on July 13 and July 26 to review a total of 11 facility reported incidents. Please let me know if there are any other questions or comments that I can address at this time.
Dr. Chow, any?
Well, I read the minutes and there was discussion about all the numbers of backlog. Did we get any more clarity from the state regarding what they're going to do with cases that go back 2 or 3 years at this point?
Commissioner, when I spoke to CDPH surveyors, they are trying their best to catch up with their investigations. I think some of them, there's a lot of kind of like short staff also at CDPH, according to one of the surveyors. And there are also new surveyors that are also handling the cases.
So they're still intent on going way back and looking at cases for which we may already have resolved what the issues were, and people won't even remember what they are. That's yeah, it's problematic. But just simply from it would seem that they should really be doing something better than that to make that even worthwhile. But
Correct.
The numbers of cases for staff to resident allegations of abuse seem really to do well over the last, I guess well, I see that the blocks are going in different ways, but it does look like there aren't quite as many as there were way back earlier the last in this last year. So do you feel that that's reported correctly, or that we may have some underreporting?
I think for, we have did a lot of education with our staff to be mandated reporters, and I think we have been successful in that. Our percentage of reporting to mandated reporters were at least 90% already, so staff are really encouraged and have more confidence in reporting instead of calling for QM to report. So I think our staff are more confident to do their own mandated reporters, and we have to follow up with our investigation.
Okay, no, thank you. It's really nice to see that with the, I think that perhaps is related to the tone that administration has set, trying to look at the issues rather than an individual. And I would think that this is beginning to show that there is also improvement in the treatment of residents, or at least the perceived treatment by residents as to the care being given by our staff. So I thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Chow.
Yeah, thank you. The trend line here is very favorable, and the cultural changes that you've instituted, I think, reflected in the numbers we're seeing here. So that's really terrific. And I gather, Mark, you'll let us know if there is anyone on the public comment line, right?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Is
Right,
that move forward?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you.
Item 6 is the Laguna Honda Hospital operations update.
Good. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Perfect.
I can't quite see you all, but My name is John Grimes, and I am the Chief Operations Officer. I think you've seen me before here. I have a couple of people I want to introduce to you before I start the HVAC presentation. The first person is Diana Kenyon, who is the Director of Facilities. Diana, can you see her? And the second person is Benito Aguin, who is our project manager, architect who's overseeing our capital projects here at the hospital. So I've asked both of them to join me to put a little context to the HVAC system history that we have. Diana has been here, she doesn't look it, but she's been here for 28 years, start as of tomorrow. And she has a historical perspective on all the buildings, not only the new building, and we rely on her heavily around what happened, why did we get to this place, and Benito, who started roughly around the same time that I do as a project manager, together, they both have in-depth technical knowledge around the HVAC system, and they are here to help me with some of the questions. So if I remember correctly, I think we've actually talked about this HVAC system before. So in the slides, I'll quickly go over the history and spend more time on all the work that we've been doing on the system. But please, if there's any history that you want to have, I have some help to help me figure that out. So the next slide. Oh, this slide. This is slide 2.
I'm sorry, John. The screen on our end, the screen is not showing the presentation. So could you all pull it up?
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. There we go.
Now it's showing.
All right. So the next slide. There. Up. Back. There we go. So Commissioner Chow may have been here when the new hospital was built. And, you know, as we look at the history, the new hospital, we moved into it in 2010. That's important to note because the hospital took several years to build. And part of what's interesting about this, and also a problem for us, is the HVAC system was sitting on the top of that hospital for 2 years before it opened. The design of the HVAC system was not a particularly innovative one. In fact, as our chief engineer has said, it was a canned design, meaning that it was kind of taken off the shelf. And because of that, we've encountered a number of issues. The design was based on industry standards, but those standards did not match our location. Does someone have a question? Can you hear me? No, back. They're still there. Although it was an accepted design throughout the HVAC installations field, it didn't really work for the area that's here. When you have a CAN-designed system, it's done for a number of different reasons, because that was a question like why, and the answer was very simple. It was less expensive, took less time to install, took less time on the design, and therefore the system was value engineered. Next slide, please. This kind of shows a good example of what we have here. The design of the system did not take into consideration the atmospheric conditions of the area. For those who are native San Franciscans, you know that this area in particular has a lot of moisture, fog, with a high salt content. The other issue that we noticed, that when the system was built, it was undersized. And again, that was because of cost, and the forecast of this area said that the ambient air temperature would not exceed 70 degrees. In the last 2 years, with the exception of this year, we've seen that not to be the case. And finally, the placement of the chillers themselves were an issue. I like this visual. They were placed on the top of the roofs. And therefore, especially in the north and south tower, which were a higher elevation, were exposed to more of the salt air. Next slide. It was understood that there was a serious design flaw. The company that went through a series of mechanical manipulations in an effort to do proper air balancing. The technical engineer starved certain areas of the hospital to make sure that the balancing was correct. And we were finding areas like the pharmacy where there was no air flow going to that area. They only balanced 2 floors at a time in an effort to manipulate the system. And the balance of the system, to balance the system, they used operable windows to get the appropriate airflow. And they also did custom programming of the individual controllers to override some of the mechanical deficiencies in order to pass some of the testing that was done. We also saw that in the end, we were left with a fully functional, when it was fully functional, a system that would only cool 10 to 15 degrees below ambient air temperature outside. So when we were seeing last year and the year before, temperatures at 100, 105 degrees, and that would be, what, 85, 90 degrees and up in terms of what we could cool. Next slide, please. At the completion of construction, the building was being commissioned. And what that means is the commission is like a final systems check to make sure that everything is performed as designed. It was noted at that time that by the commissioning agent that things were not functioning properly as the design said. It was determined that the best way to resolve the situation was to initiate a lawsuit, and subsequently $12 million was paid in an out-of-court settlement, but that money went to the general fund in lieu of making the corrections of the system. I think what was thought is that we as a city program would have the ability to request the funds from the general fund as we needed them. And I think out of that $12 million, I think we got about $5.4 million to do the repairs. And it's been a long, kind of arduous process. Next slide. What Laguna Honda has done to mitigate these changes. I wanted to spend some time to show you the effort that the team, Diana's team, has done to mitigate the problems that we saw in a flawed system. As you can see, some of the fixes have been very small and some more significant. Although the team has developed a lot of standard work around how to fix some of the design flaws, we also have partnered with Hvac, which is the Public Health Emergency Preparedness and Response, to help us develop a plan that looks at kind of temperature trends, the current outside temperature, and what we are predicting the temperature in the area to be. So some of what we developed has been when we think the outside temperature will be predicted to be 80 degrees, we go into motion and we start to monitor the temperatures in the individual rooms, patient rooms, in the common areas, or rooms where we feel like the patients will be. As we're monitoring the indoor temperatures, once any temperature gets to be 80 degrees, we use what you see here, the building management system, which is a very specialized system that kind of helps us look at individual rooms, different areas, and monitor how those temperatures are getting out of what we are hoping that we would want to see. When a resident room or a common area becomes 80 degrees, we start to move that resident to a space which is cooler. Sometimes that can be in a great room or other areas where there's a better temperature. We've also installed on the different neighborhoods portable coolers that will help, that are actually ventilated out and help for that immediate area to cool. So we have many cooling stations on the neighborhoods. But as you can imagine, those are a problem. They can only cool, I think, within a 6-foot radius or something similar to that. So it's very limited. We bought fans in the old days, and we made sure that there were, I don't know how many fans I bought, to make sure that everyone has a fan. Fans come up missing. We're tracking fans. And when COVID started, we really started to get concerned about the use of fans. And so we've been partnering with our infection control partners to see, can we have fans? Can we make sure that when we have them, they're not blowing on everywhere, they're not bouncing air off the floor? It's like a whole huge thing. And the engineers also have been collaborating with nursing staff to do things as small as shutting the windows and shutting blinds. So as the sun rises, we'll make sure that the blinds are shut in that area. And then as the sun goes over, we'll shut the blinds as the sun is going down so we can maintain some kind of temperature for the next day and keep the building cool. The other major flaw that was part of the design is that they left operable windows. And where I grew up, I used to get yelled at for leaving the window open when the air conditioning is on. And that's what we find ourselves doing quite a bit. But what we can understand is the temperatures are so hot, if it's only lowering the temperature, that the residents, the staff are feeling like they're not getting any relief. So their feeling is that they're opening the windows to get fresh air or cooler air, but they're actually working against the air conditioning system. And so we had to have done a lot of education around that. One last thing, we've been very lucky in a way that, you know, our residents, because of a number of different reasons, maybe the medications don't tend to get as hot as maybe you and I would be. So they are, the warmer temperatures they feel more comfortable with. But we've had to work with the medical staff and nursing because that can be very dangerous, because they may not anticipate that they're overheating. So we do a lot of coordination with nursing and medicine to make sure as we have people in the rooms that we are mitigating those temperatures. Some of the more significant changes that we have done to the building chillers is that we've actually replaced 2 of the 3 chillers in the north and the south towers, I think within the last 2 years. And that has helped those. I was trying to get a video of this. QM did a video where you see one of the QM staff touching the chillers and it's disintegrating in their hand. And the problem with this is if you have an air conditioning system in your home, you can usually get about 20 years or more out of that. We weren't able to even get 10 years out of our systems. Next slide. Simultaneous to all the work that we've done, we actually, around 5 years ago, made a bigger request through the capital budget process to replace those chillers and to do some air balancing. It was thought that the repair would be done in 4 phases. We've actually completed phase 1 and 2, and we're at the end of phase 3, where we have upgraded 400 controllers, and we've been performing air balancing and testing as we go. We have completed, like I said, phase 1, 2, and we're almost finished with phase 3. And when we have completed those 3, we're hopeful that that will help us know if we both have the finances and that we have enough that we've learned from those 3 to kind of complete that last phase. The unfortunate thing about this is that once we do all of those repairs, the system is still flawed, extremely flawed. We will still have only the ability to cool the air outside 10 to 15 degrees. Even with the repairs, we actually did the repairs and upgraded the equipment to be marine grade that is supposed to actually be able to tolerate this kind of outside condition. But even with that, we're hoping we can get 15 years out of it instead of 10. So nothing has been a great repair. And so that's it for my presentation. If you have questions for me or Diana or Benito, I'll let them do some of the talking and share the wealth.
Commissioners, any questions or comments? And by the way, Mr. Grimes, Dr. Chow's been here many, many, many decades longer than when the building was opened.
I didn't want to make assumptions, Mark. Any questions for me? We got some of the questions that you sent, and we sent responses back around the different stages with the prices the Commissioner Chow had asked. So we did those already.
Yes, actually, I was here before even the building was, and I am actually very sorry to hear about the additional construction problems that you're all facing. We face those with, I guess, regularity from your predecessors coming before the commission and trying to explain all the different things that were happening to the entire project, including the overruns, the cost of steel, and now you're telling us about the cost of the chillers, and of course the reason for some of the lower costs was to even just complete the 2 buildings, and the third one, as you all know, we don't have, but I think the work that you have done here is very commendable over these years, trying to adjust this problem. And I'm hoping General doesn't really have that problem from the outset. It doesn't sound like they do, but I can understand people if they don't know the type of marine environment that we have here. It just sounds like the ship is rusting all over, and at least the chillers are. And I do commend that. You have phases that make sense. Sounds a little sad that we're not able to get cooling greater than 15 degrees down. It is true that an older person may, in fact, be generally with a lower temperature on their, themselves, and therefore the higher temperature may sometimes be even more comfortable. People go to Palm Springs and so forth in that age group for that type of environment, and it helps their arthritis supposedly. But I don't think that's a reason for us to keep 85 degrees throughout the whole house. So I really commend you on your remedial work that you've done. I think that as you may need more funding, I think you should continue to tell them that really you owe us 12 million.
I like your
And that there shouldn't be any reason that we delay really continuing to fix it. It sounds like you've been really getting a lot of cooperation from the city, which is great. But I think if that isn't going to be happening, this would be something that the commission could really help with, because this is our most vulnerable population. And, we also need to make sure that that population is cared for appropriately. So thank you for your work. And I guess as one last aside, actually, before any of these buildings were here, I was part of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Uh, and that was just to look at the old buildings. So at least we're not dealing with those.
Now that I think about it, I've seen pictures in our museum. I don't mean that. We have a history. We have a history.
Yes, with you, we go back a long ways. Thank you very much for your work and your dedication. And I know that your fellow, managers here also feel the same. Somebody staying this long really is dedicated to our residents here, and I think it shows. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to really thank Diana. 28 years tomorrow. That's I don't know that anybody here has that record. So you're absolutely right. I wanted to have her present to you so you can see her.
Okay. Well, she obviously remembers before the buildings were built here and all the problems we did have before, right?
Right.
Commissioner Green, any comments or questions from you?
Notes, and I hope this is some consolation. The problems exist, universally. I actually had a patient give $1 million for CPMC, and they wanted to use it for HVAC. Of course, I wouldn't let them. I got to control where it went, and actually went to a professorship. But they kept on coming back. And then, of course, I think I put in the thing. We have this brand new hospital right on Van Ness. So somehow with the airflow system, they neglected to put proper flow in all these rooms. So we can't do a D&C in our treatment room because the airflow isn't right. And when you walk into our operating rooms, at least where I work, it sounds like you fell into a jet engine. I mean, it is literally, you can't hear anything. And so this is just, one example of, modern technology with limitless funding, and yet they've still run into problems. I mean, I think all doctors know what HVAC is, probably better than they know what a lot of other abbreviations are in medicine, because it's just a real challenge, and it affects everyone's work, and of course it affects the residents and the quality of their life. So I think you've done a terrific job of breaking this down, of analyzing it, and of looking at solutions that are hard to come by, no matter in many cases what kind of funding you have to be able to solve the problem. So I really congratulate you and see that that I wish you could have some input where I work. So thank you.
I say thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you.
And as another old timer, if I may join in with a quick comment, when the original chillers were put in, there were 2 years of the community, the neighborhood complaining about the noise of the chillers. So I'm hoping that you all know that history, that anything you replace, that you're keeping that in mind, because it's a big deal. And I remember that these meetings were a lot about people coming to complain in the community and the West Side Observer and all that.
Mm-hmm. I think we have less complaints now, but when I started, we were hearing complaints about that, right, Dana?
Yeah,
So,
that's my favorite meeting for a while.
Yeah, we have a few that we know very well.
Yeah, just as long as y'all keep that in mind as you're replacing, that's why I commented, not just to jump in, but thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, thanks, everybody. The next item is item 7, the Laguna Honda Hospital Equity and Culture Update.
Hi, everyone. Hello, commissioners. My name is Ami Fishman. I'm the director of the Department of Equity and Culture. Very happy to be with you all today and to share these updates with you. Jennifer Carden-Wade, who's our executive sponsor for this work, and my supervisor is also here to answer questions. Because this is my first presentation to you all, I think this will be kind of more of a big picture kind of overview presentation, talking a little bit about how we're approaching the work. And as we continue on in the future, I'll expect that these presentations will get more kind of into the details and specifics about what we're doing. So thank you. So first, I just wanted to start with a little bit of context setting. This slide actually comes from the DPH Racial Equity Action Plan. To provide a little bit of context, so as you all know, this plan was submitted by Dr. Ayanna Bennett and the Office of Health Equity to the city's Office of Racial Equity. And I just want to really recognize that all of the work that we're doing here at Laguna Honda exists within this equity framework that and infrastructure that has really been in motion for a long time. So there's a lot of work done starting, you know, way back in 2014 in a really organized way with the creation of BAHI, the Black African American Health Initiative, focusing on workforce diversity, cultural humility, and really starting to look at and address racialized health disparities facing especially Black and African American patients, clients, and staff within DPH. We also started to include equity as part of our workforce strategic planning. We joined GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which we've continued to be involved with over the years to really support this work. And then now, you know, leading into these last couple of years, the creation both of the Office of Health Equity, which Dr. Ayanna Bennett's leading, and then also the creation of the citywide Office of Racial Equity, which we now sort of report up to. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So our context happens within that context. We, in 2015 at Laguna Honda, started participating in Dr. Ken Hardy's sessions around racial humility in 2015. In 2016, we began partnering with the Department of Human Resources to provide a lot of cultural humility, bias, cross-cultural communication training. We also began including equity in our strategic planning processes in 2017, identified an equity lead in 2018, which was myself, to work with other folks across DPH and participate in GARE. We started integrating equity into our A3 process in 2019, and then continued throughout 2020, and then now with 2021 have finally launched this Department of Equity and Culture to really sort of solidify our efforts. Next slide, please. So just the structure of how this all works. So we are, as I mentioned, reporting up to the Office of Health Equity within DPH, and then also they're reporting up to the citywide Office of Racial Equity. And then here at Laguna Honda, we're kind of creating three bodies that all sort of work together to implement this work. So our department oversees our strategic priorities through the A3, reports to you and other leadership and executive committees. So supports the equity leadership across the DPH. We participate as part of an equity leads team across DPH and interface there, and then work on the racial equity action plan. And then we have a council that we are in the process of building up that consists of folks from all over Laguna Honda. So we're really trying to create an environment here where everyone understands that equity is all of our work, and that there's work to be done to advance equity in every single department. So whether we're in patient-facing departments or not, that we have work to do and that we have direct kind of representation from members of each of those departments who are participating in this Equity Action Council together. And then the Champions program is kind of an onboarding. This is actually a DPH-wide initiative that folks have kind of a minimum of dedicated 5 hours a month where they can participate in equity learning and also in projects and kind of get more, I think the goal is really both to make equity work something that we invest time in and that there's ways for people to do that meaningfully, and then also that we make it sort of possible for more folks to get involved and engaged. So we have, they just actually released the application process for that, and we're in the process of recruiting champions from Laguna Honda again this year. We had, I think, 7 the last time that it was offered last year. So that was a little interrupted due to COVID, but we're hoping that they're going to be able to really launch fully this year. Next slide, please. So we are the Department of Equity and Culture, and the reason for that is manyfold, but I put this slide up to really show that, you know, within our work in DPH and at Laguna Honda as well, there's so many different places where people are being exposed to ideas, to education, to development. There's many, many different sort of entry points, including our trauma-informed systems program, wellness champions, you know, unit and department-based education, different council and workshops, and those kinds of ways that people are getting involved. But historically, these have sort of been a series of kind of disjointed experiences, not necessarily building off of each other, sort of disconnected. And so that created some challenges of not having a kind of coordinated communication, lack of sometimes clearly articulated goals or measurable objectives for, you know, what are we going to expect to see or do differently as a result of our participation in these things. Unclear next steps, right? Even with some of these really wonderful training opportunities, we know if we don't have something to go and do afterwards, sometimes it kind of falls by the wayside. And then I think sort of lack of institutional clarity, but also transparency about what we were doing. So this work is both about the learning and also about the practice and really needing to integrate that to shift the culture. So we really see the Department of Equity and Culture as a place that is a centralized place to help hold that work and keep the momentum moving forward as every department works to integrate an equity lens and practice into their organizational work. Next slide, please. So again, equity and culture, because we know that the culture matters, right? And how people feel about being at work and feel about how we're doing really matters. So this employee engagement results, I know there were some questions that we responded to back in July and again this time about this. So these are the results from 2019. We're actually going to be doing the engagement survey again in early 2022. It got pushed back a little bit as we are surging. But we saw that, especially when we look at the data across by disaggregating by race, that our when it comes to respect and kind of experience of being at the workplace, our Black and African American staff are having a very, very different experience and a much more negative experience of really not seeing that, you know, managers and staff are treating people from all ethnic groups and racial groups with respect, and not seeing a visible commitment and active steps to improve racial equity. So, you know, how people are experiencing this place really matters, and this being able to sort of begin to disaggregate this data by race shows us a really different picture than just looking at it kind of all at once. So in order to change the culture, to really be one of inclusion and one of belonging, we have to both work on the policies, but really also work on the practices and the behavior of our staff and of how we all are working together. So some key strategies that we've identified to do that is, again, clear, visible, dedicated equity leadership to really support infrastructure and maintain a sense of momentum and urgency. I think one of the things that we found is that, and unfortunately COVID continues to disrupt this a little bit, but we need this to always be a priority, right? And it can't be a sort of thing that we do when we have time for it. It really needs to be integrated into everything that we do and just how we operate. So a racial equity agenda that's rooted in structural and systemic analysis. So, you know, sometimes when people think about culture, they think about these ideas of like being nicer to each other or saying hi in the hallways. We really want to push that we're talking about something deeper than that and shifting from responding to incidents as individual or case specific to institutional. So really looking at these things from a systems perspective. And lastly, to recognize that education, access, and sort of professional development opportunities for staff have not actually been equitably accessible here. So it's really challenging for especially our frontline staff to have access to these kinds of development opportunities. And if we want to push the whole institution forward, we really need to figure out how we can support all of our staff to have a shared language, framework analysis, and understanding. Next slide, please. So these are some of the priorities that we set out for 2021. And, you know, just as kind of a big picture strokes, we're really looking at all levels here, from the individual behavior, skills development. We really want to think about what are equity competencies that people need to have in order for us to do our work well. And then to be able to actually have those competencies reflected back to us, be able to assess that people have skills for conflict communication, you know, for really working cross-culturally with respect and dignity. Team-based work as well, leadership, really, again, setting the tone, making this work very visible, normalizing conversations about race and equity. For patient and resident care, making sure that we are having person-centered care that leads us to improved health outcomes. And then our organizational culture and practice, as I've talked about before, really thinking about what does an organizational culture that facilitates inclusion, belonging, equity really look like, and how do we move towards a place where people see this as a place where they are really encouraged and honored to grow and develop and really bring their best. So I want to name, and I think Commissioner Chow, you raised this, this report and kind of our current way of reporting is being very influenced by the REAP, the Racial Equity Action Plan goals, which are very workforce driven, as well as our A3. That said, health equity and wellness for residents has been a priority and continues to be and always must be a priority for us, both here at Laguna Honda, but at DPH as well. And so as we're doing this work that's focused on workforce engagement and experience, we're not stopping the work of our, you know, really looking at our patient outcomes. Some of the ways that that's already happening is really starting, as I mentioned, with the Equity Action Council. One of their first sort of deliverables is that every department needs to be tracking equity metrics, and so we're really working with the departments to help them identify, if they are patient-facing departments, what are health outcomes that they can be and need to be tracking and looking at by race. We're also working with our quality management team and the San Francisco Health Network quality as a whole to really look at how can we be tracking our unusual occurrences in a way that makes it easy and really accessible for us to look at those data with an equity lens, look at, you know, are there racialized disparities that are happening here and how can we address that? Next slide. So I just wanted to briefly share with you our A3 framework and note that we use the GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity framework, to really organize our strategic plan for equity, which is the normalize, organize, and operationalize. And we found this to be really useful These things are happening sort of simultaneously, but I think a lot of what we're really focused on in this moment of building our department is around normalizing conversations about respect, equity in the workplace, and normalizing those in how we're looking at, again, looking at things like unusual occurrences or looking at, where might bias be playing out, really normalizing that. These are conversations we can and we must have, and then really focusing also on kind of organizing, so building up the infrastructure to support us to be able to do the work. So a lot of our focus right now has been on, if you go to the next slide, please, has been on, developing that equity council, developing those concrete data sets, getting people recruited and participating, and then really starting to just build up that structure that we had started starting in 2018 and into 2020, but then got a little diverted with our COVID efforts. Next slide. So our 2020 priorities, during the year of having everything change with COVID, we really just worked to try to maintain our momentum amidst the pandemic response, really keep equity at the center. So making sure that in our decision-making, we were supporting staff and residents in ways that had an equity lens. One concrete example of this is that we recognize that our staff especially Black and brown staff, were at risk of being stopped and sort of targeted by police for during the, I'm blanking on the word, the curfew, thank you, the curfew. And so not all of our staff had up-to-date DSW badges, so we worked to make sure that everyone had a DSW badge, and then also worked with law enforcement to make sure that that badge was recognized as, as staff were traveling after hours during the curfew, that they wouldn't be at risk of being sort of targeted in those efforts. So being over-policed. And then again, providing opportunities for staff to stay engaged in equity and learning activities to the degree that we could do that. So next slide, please. So some of our accomplishments, like I said, we were looking for, what are some ways that we can just make it, there was so much happening in 2020, in terms of what was going on nationally around racial equity, around uprisings, for racial justice. And so one of the things that we did with our partners at CSFG was to launch a 21-day racial equity learning challenge that was a sort of self-guided opportunity. We created a website. We invited people across CPH, had 400 people sign up to participate in this daily learning opportunity. Also, I worked with the Office of Health Equity to finalize and launch the Introduction to Health Equity module, which we've assigned to all DPH staff and have had over 8,000 staff take this course. And it really provides a very, I think, useful introduction to, again, in the spirit of normalizing, right, to have some shared language, some shared understanding of what do we even mean when we're saying these words, health equity, what are we talking about, and some concrete ways of what that can look like in practice. We held our first ever Juneteenth celebration here, socially distanced. It was very beautiful. We promoted a lot of wellness events, and we continue to just include equity content, just trying to make these conversations visible, accessible, and promote learning and engagement opportunities. Next slide, please. And then for our 2020 priorities, as I said before, we're really focused on infrastructure, including our data systems, really wanting to infuse and integrate equity into all of our work. Equity is not the work of the Department of Equity and Culture. That department really just helps hold that work, but it needs to be everywhere, and make that work more visible, so more of our staff know that it's happening and know how to be involved, and really engage staff at all levels. So far, next slide, please. Some of our accomplishments are that we were able to successfully relaunch our council. We have representation of more than 80% of our departments so far. We are launching work groups from there where people will be focused on communications and data and policy and staff engagement and training. We've been building up the metrics. We started a newsletter. We just published our second newsletter. We reopened our wellness hub, and have also been able to offer some more wellness opportunities for staff and exercise, which has been really wonderful. We've been doing some targeted technical assistance and training with departments. So recognizing that in order for our departments to be able to really run with this equity work and really own it, that there needs to be some support and some kind of capacity building. So working with some of our departments to develop that common framework and language, talk about, what does equity mean in our department, and what's that going to look like, and how might we change our practices? We're working with an organization to develop and implement a conflict coaching and customer service training that we believe will really support our staff to have more skills around working both with each other, but also working with our residents and families in a way that really honors, honors their needs and allows us to really navigate through some of the challenge and conflict better. And then we have a placement. We're very excited. We got a fellow from the city. So we have a fellow starting with us this month, at the end of this month, that's going to be focused on this work. And lastly, for this moment, we created an equity lending library. So we were able to purchase a bunch of equity books, and we are making those available to staff for their own individualized learning. Or if staff want to start book groups, we're loaning those out and just continuing. Well, our plan is to continue to build that library up with recommendations and also just have that be an ongoing resource for staff. So I think the only thing I'll say is I just received notice that I am getting redeployed starting tomorrow back to the COVID emergency response. So as COVID continues to teach us, we have to be very flexible. So we're working on a plan to manage what that will mean. It may shift sort of what our next report looks like to you all, but I feel confident that we can continue to build on all of the great work that we've been doing and hopefully not lose too much momentum. And so I think with that, I just want to say thank you so much to you all for your support, to Jennifer Carton-Wade, to our exec team, especially Michael, Monica, John, who have been incredibly supportive and really provided a lot of leadership in this work, to Dr. Bennett and so many others who are doing this work day in and day out. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that incredible presentation. And I see that Commissioner Guillermo is here, so I should pass the gavel and let her lead the meeting now.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. I appreciate your stepping in my dental emergency situation. I am so sad that I missed the majority of this presentation, but I read the I studied the slides, and I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to go deeper when with folks when I have a chance. And I'm sorry to hear about your redeployment, but I understand, there is nothing guaranteed at this time. So let me open it up at this point to my fellow committee members, commissioners, and see if there's any questions for you. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I don't see, okay, Dr. Chow, I see your hand.
Yes, well, welcome back. I thought you were just going to be able to rest, but that's great that you've come back. I am struck by the detail that the department, what is it, the Equity and Culture Department has put forward to us, and the amount of work that they have put in to try to respond to this a need, especially on the workforce. And I'm hoping, I was glad to hear something about health equity. Dr. Bennett particularly has added that as something very important for us to do, and I think that goes right along with the mission. So on I think I had asked, as you know, to have us be able to disaggregate the Asian responses, because there really can be a difference between not just the different Asian cultures, but that lump includes Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, and they could, as staff, have really quite different opinions. I think that's just as important also as we're looking at how the residents are, feeling in terms of the work that you're doing, and the division of equity within the resident population. So it isn't just Asians, but I think we have to be aware of the needs of certain groups, even probably within the Latino population. I'm not as well acquainted with it, but certainly not sure that we have any American Indians, but we just talked about them recently. So I think again, you can only go so far with the staff that you have, and it seems to me that for the difficulties we've had in the past year and a half, this is a remarkable plan, and I really commend you for it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and just to, I really appreciate your question about disaggregating, and I did raise that to our DPH HR analyst, who's working with the vendor on creating the next employee engagement survey. It's a different vendor than they used the last time, and I think we actually do have. I think we'll have some opportunity to really weigh in. So I'll definitely continue to push for that. And make sure that we can hopefully get that data a little bit more. I know sometimes in the reporting, depending on how many people have responded, sometimes we have to re-aggregate just so that there isn't, so that they maintain anonymity with the, well, everyone really got me, with the staff, especially for some of the smaller populations like Native American, for example. They may not be able to always report out at a very granular level if there's not a lot of respondents, but we also did sort of push to move the date for the next employee engagement survey up. It was set to happen in October, but because of the ongoing COVID response, there was concern that we wouldn't get a good response rate from our staff, and so they're going to be doing that probably in February or March of next year.
So I think that what you just said there, in terms of sometimes the numbers are too small to preserve confidentiality, I think as the commission's resolution asked, that's the appropriate time to put in a little asterisk saying that these people have been involved in the studies. And so I really appreciate that. And I want to also thank you for the comments you've made on your own equity program, the first module that I think we all participated in. And I was able to read your comments, and just I think I didn't know we were supposed to add comments or not, but where I did, I actually did support some of your comments too, in terms of improving, as you were doing, improving the module. So
wonderful. Thank you
for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. Dr. Green?
Yeah, so, it's so impressive what the DPH has done in general, and it's particularly important, I think, based on what you said, that we have this really beautifully defined matrix for progress, but that you're also specifying it to both your workforce as well as the residents at Laguna, and I think you're doing a wonderful job of individualizing it for your own institution. One of the questions I had as we work through this is, do you have confidence that, with some of the workforce shortages and the issues we're dealing with, will the staff, as they go through this training, have enough time off or time, while they are on the job to spend as long as they'd like to in working through these modules? Because I think as we go forward, there'll even be more detail and more work involved. And I don't know what our allocation is in terms of budget for this kind of work, but I could see where it might take several staff some time during their normal work hours or maybe overtime to do this. Can you comment a little bit about that and you know, how we'll be able to work that out?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question, and I think, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I mean, I think the staff are supposed to have release time to do mandatory online training and training. I mean, we used to do a lot of in-person training, and I come from an educator background. I've been teaching and training a long time, and while I think online education has a lot of value, I think especially with these kinds of learning, like there is just no substitution for being able to sit down together and actually have a conversation, and for people to be able to ask questions, to practice, you know. And so that's been a big challenge, I think, for us here is, you know, prior to COVID, we had at least the in-service structure for our frontline staff where they had an hour release time off the floor to come and be in an in-person training space. That's definitely one of the things that we're really going to be working through with our training and education work group is really trying to think about what are some strategies that we can use. And I know they're actually they're having the same question at the jail as well. And I imagine at DSFG as well that, you know, how can we actually create the space for people to have some of those more in-person conversations and figure out a staffing model that will allow for that? And also, how do we do more creative kind of, you know, at the elbow sort of training, essentially. So we had that model around our Epic implementation, and I think there's some things we can learn from it, even for this. So I've been talking with other colleagues within DPH about, you know, testing out some strategies like kind of micro trainings, or how do we integrate a conversation about equity or about, you know, something that we ask people to read or do beforehand into the huddle. You know, how can we really build in kind of case scenarios so that it's not a passive learning that happens on the computer and then you don't talk about it again. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of work to do here, and I do believe that the Office of Health Equity is going to continue to create trainings like the one that we have on our SF Learning now. I know that the DPH HR Workforce Development, the People Development team is also doing a lot of online live trainings, but I think I'm really going to be you know, looking for guidance and sort of creative thinking with the folks who are, you know, who are at the bedside, or who are, you know, working in our environmental services, and they're not sitting in front of their computer all day, and even if they were, it's maybe not the best way to learn some of this. So yeah, I think we want to employ a lot of different strategies, be really creative and agile, and I think over time, you know, we'll sort of build up our collective knowledge. The other thing I'll say is we have, now in DPH, we have a requirement for hours of equity learning. That's part of our performance appraisal process. And so we weren't able to really get it together this year because of the situation that we were in, but I think that we are gonna, you know, one of the things I'm talking with the departments about is, you know, use those hours. So for example, you know, if it's like, say, nutrition services has been talking about how food insecurity is a really big challenge for their discharge planning. So having a discharge plan that's realistic for residents who get out into the community and don't necessarily have access to all the things that, you know, were part of the nutritional part of their discharge plan. So we've been talking about, you know, maybe there's a way that team can take learning and education and guided discussions about food insecurity, about food deserts, you know, about those kinds of things, work it into their meetings and those sorts of things, and then they're satisfying that requirement, but then they're also building up their collective knowledge base, and then from there they can come up with some ideas for what they might do differently around discharge planning. So I'm excited about the way that we can use some of these requirements and tools to really try to encourage the departments to tailor the education in a way that's going to be most useful for them rather than just, you know, click through these things and then satisfy your requirement and check a box.
Thank you so much. It's so important the way you're thinking, and I'm so heartened to hear it because, you read these things in isolation, you come away from the training energized, but to change culture, people need to come together. That's what culture is. And so I'm just delighted that you are thinking about creative ways of moving the education forward in a practical way, especially given the limitations we have from the pandemic. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Green. And I just want to add my support for Dr. Green's suggestions and comments about making the time very thoughtfully and very intentionally to find different ways of internalizing and learning from the learning, because that's really it's that iterative process that's really going to make sure that this becomes embedded in the culture and the practice of health and well-being, for not just Laguna Honda, but for the for the whole department, and then for those of us who are interacting with the department in the city. So it's clear, Zoe, that you have very strong feelings and excitement for the work, and that's why really it's unfortunate that you have to be redeployed. Hopefully it's for many reasons that it's a short period of time and we can get back to what I think is a totally exciting important part of the work at Laguna Honda. So thank you very much. I don't see any additional questions. So, best of luck in your redeployment. I know you're not the only one that's being redeployed, but you're here in front of us now, so we can express that to you on behalf of everybody else that is having to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, great.
And Commissioners, the next item is consideration for a closed session.
Okay, is there a motion to consider a closed session?
So moved.
Second?
The roll call vote, Commissioner Chow,
Yes.
Commissioner Guillermo,
Yes.
and Commissioner Green.
Yes.
Great, please give me 30 seconds to move this over. All right, we're back in open session, and Commissioners, if you would consider a motion to disclose or not disclose discussions in closed session.
Move not to disclose.
I would second that.
The roll call vote, Commissioner Chow,
Yes.
Commissioner Green,
Yes.
and Commissioner Guillermo. Oh, Commissioner Guillermo,
Yes.
thank you. And then the last business is a possible consideration for adjournment.
And so moved.
Second?
A roll call vote, Commissioner Chow,
Yes.
Commissioner Green,
Yes.
and Commissioner Guillermo.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
thank you. See you in a month.
Yeah.